Good afternoon. This is Faraz Syed. I see that we have a few more folks joining here, so let's get started. So as a way of introduction, again, my name is Faraz Syed. I'm the Vice President of Engineering. We also have Patrick McCartney, our Solutions Architect Manager, and Patrick will be presenting on the topic of HP's ALM Lab Management. But before we get into the lab management piece, I wanted to quickly go over the Checkpoint Technologies and what we bring to the table and give you a little bit of an overview of our company. So the company, Checkpoint Technologies, we were incorporated in January of 2003. We're based out of Tampa, Florida, but we have satellite offices across the U.S. Myself, I'm based out of Charlotte, North Carolina. Patrick McCartney, he's based out of Buffalo, New York. We are HP's elite partner, and there are a few of us in this category, so that means we're one of the highest level of partnership that you can get with HP. We specialize in the ALM portfolio and also provide services with ITPS, for example, with DSM and other technologies in conjunction with our EWC partnership with Whitlock and Evergreen. We also provide support. So for your first-year support, if you have a support contract renewal coming up, we'll be happy to help you with that. That means that we'll be your first point of contact for support needs. We have a state-of-the-art training center in Tampa, Florida. So we provide training as part of the authorized training partner of HP. And we also provide custom training on-site in addition to mentoring as well. So with that quick overview, I want to thank everyone for joining the webinar today, and I'm going to pass it on to Patrick McCartney to go and dive down into the lab management component. Patrick?
All right. Thanks, Faraz. Okay. So today we're going to be talking about HP's ALM Lab Management. And we're going to do some slides, and we're also going to go into a live demo so we can show you how this is going to work. A little bit of housekeeping. So there is a questions section in the GoToWebinar. So if you have any questions, just go ahead and put them right in the chat, and we'll answer some of them during the session. And then once we get to the questions portion, we'll go through, and I'll answer some more of them. And then if there's any questions we don't get to, we'll follow up and give you guys a full list of the questions and answers, so you'll have all the questions and answers that we're asked in the session. So HP's lab management. So the first thing is that it's only available in HP ALM 11.5 and later. So it's not in Quality Center, only in the ALM version. And it came out in the 11.5 version, and so this will also be in 11.51 and 11.52. The biggest feature that it gives is it provides a server-side execution of our tests. So these are both functional tests and performance tests. And we're going to get in and talk about what the difference between the server-side execution and the traditional client-side execution is in a few minutes. The next thing it provides is the ability for us to do advanced scheduling. So we're able to use a scheduler. We can go in and say we want a test set to run at a certain time, and then it'll go in and automatically execute. And it's a little bit different than the traditional Quality Center scheduler where we had to set it in to go run. This is actually going to just do it automatically for us on the server side.
Hey, Pat, I want to interrupt. Looks like I'm getting some folks sending chat over here saying that the audio is breaking up. I can also see it's a little bit choppy. So I'm not sure if you're on the computer or on the phone.
No, I'm on the phone. 1 second here.
Okay. Folks, I apologize for this. Technological issues, so we'll sort through this and continue the presentation.
And Faraz, is that better?
That's much better. It sounds really good. And so if we do run into this problem again, Patrick, I'll interrupt, and we'll see what we can do. But it does sound
okay.
A lot better.
Okay. My apologies, guys. So what we're going to be able to do with this is manage our lab resources. So when we talk about lab resources, what we really mean is our testing machines. So machines that have HP's Unified Functional Testing, Service Test, Quick Test Professional, or any of the other testing tools that we might be using, including Performance Center. So it's going to actually allow us to allocate these machines and reserve them, and also mark them as being unavailable or under maintenance if need be, so we can share those machines. What it's also going to provide is a build verification suite capability to run from continuous integration tools. So if you have a build that you're executing using a CI tool like Hudson or Jenkins, you can have that build tool automatically deploy a build verification suite that can go out and test these, run these tests, and then it's going to bring those results back automatically into ALM. So the first thing I want to talk through is the difference between the client side, which is the traditional quality center style of execution, and the server side test execution. So under a traditional remote test execution scenario, so we're talking about logging into Quality Center or ALM and executing a test on a remote machine. So we've got the ALM client, which is essentially your laptop or your desktop running the ALM client in Internet Explorer. We've got the ALM server, could be a Quality Center server as well. And we've got the remote host. So this is a machine that's running Quick Test Professional or Unified Functional Testing or some other HP testing tool. So traditionally, what's going to happen is that your ALM client retrieves all of the information from the test. So basically it says, hey, I want to run this test, and it retrieves the metadata from it. So the test ID gets that back from the server, and then it's going to send that information to the ALM client, or the remote host that's going to be running that test. So it says, hey, remote host, go run that test. Remote host then connects into the ALM server and then downloads the test. Once it downloads the test, it'll then run the test and then push the results back up to the ALM server. Now, the way that this works is that you have to have a direct communication path between the ALM client and that remote host. So if you think about logging in through a VPN connection or there's a firewall, this is where people were usually stumbling with this, is because it didn't really work well across multiple networks. So if you had to go across a subnet, if there was a firewall or a VPN connection, that would make it very difficult for you to directly communicate with that remote host. So in the new server-side execution model, it's a little bit different. So we've got the ALM client, or this could also be a continuous integration server like Hudson or Jenkins. We also then have the remote host, again, same setup, and we have the ALM server. The first thing that's going to happen is using the ALM client or the CI system, we're going to schedule a test. And this could be a test that we just say, hey, run right now, or this could be a test that we say, go run in the future. The ALM server is then going to communicate directly with that remote testing host and instruct it to execute that test. So it's going to download the test, and then it's going to bring that information back and execute it. So now that the remote host is executing, and then it's going to push those results back up to the server. So in this model, there's no direct communication between the ALM client and their remote testing host. So it'll actually run without any user intervention. So if we were to take away that ALM client, so if I say go run this test, log out of the system, it's still going to execute because I don't need that remote client to be driving the test execution. So some of the advantages of server-side execution versus our traditional execution model is, one of the big things is we don't have to have the ALM client open. So as I just mentioned, you could log out once the test is set up. You don't have to be in there kind of babysitting the test. It can run overnight. You can schedule it. You don't have to have the client open. Because we've got no direct connection between the ALM client machine and that remote machine, it's a much simpler configuration. So there's a small service that you install on that remote machine, and it integrates with the ALM server. We add it into the server, and there's no direct communication there, so we don't have to worry about those firewall issues or the subnet issues. We can then schedule these tests and run them automatically. So there is a scheduler built into Quality Center, but as you know, if you go in and you say, I want to run this test at 8 o'clock, you have to keep the ALM client open until that point in time, and then it'll eventually execute the test. And one of the big things that we get from this is, additionally, we can have machines that are locked or logged out. So those remote machines traditionally would always have to be logged in and ready to accept a test execution. In this new model, we don't have to do that. We can actually have the machine locked or logged out, and this remote execution agent is going to actually log into the machine or unlock it and then execute the test for us. So we've got these different machines that we need to add into ALM. So we have some different capabilities around how we can manage those different hosts. So our hosts are added into what's called the ALM Lab Management project. So these hosts can be business process testing hosts, UFT hosts, so this could include Quick Test Professional and Service Test, System Test, the VAPI XP test can support PC hosts, so Performance Center or Performance Center load generators. So if you're familiar with Performance Center, this is the same capability that's always existed in Performance Center, just now ported over to the functional testing side. So when we go in, we add all of our hosts into the system, and we can assign them to host pools. So these host pools are just ways of allocating different hosts. So we could have a pool for different teams if we want to, and it'll allow you to kind of segment your hardware and split it up. Or you could have a pool that is for, here's our Windows XP pool, here's our Windows 7 pool. You can have different host pools by configurations. We can also manage the location of these different pools. So I can create different locations and then associate the hosts to those locations. So if I've got a data center in, say, Charlotte, I can have a selection of hosts there, and I can tag them as being in Charlotte. I might also have hosts in Denver, hosts in Seattle, hosts in London, hosts in Bangladesh. It doesn't matter where the hosts are, I can tag them in the system, and then I can pick which location I want to pull from. And you can assign these different hosts and these different pools to different projects. So you can say, here's an ALM project, it has access to this host pool. Another ALM project might have access to a different host pool. We also get the built-in support for our scheduling. So when we schedule, we create something called a time slot. So when we're creating time slots, it actually looks a lot like an Outlook calendar, where we're going in and we're just defining the start and end time. And we define what kind of properties we want for this time slot. So really what we're doing is we're creating a reservation on a specific piece of hardware. And this hardware could be auto-matched. So we say we just want a piece of hardware that has the capabilities to run this type of test. So we specify maybe it's a business process test, maybe it's a service test, maybe it's a quick test professional test. We can have it auto-match, or we can pick the specific host that we want to run. So if we decide we want to run on a certain machine that we know we want to use, we can reserve that particular machine, or we can just pull from the general pool. The nice thing is that the time slot reservations are available to be viewed across all your projects. So if you've got 5 or 6, 10, or 30 different projects that all are using the lab management, you're going to be able to see the reservations across all of your hardware. Now, the amount of detail you can see for the reservation depends on the permissions that you have in those other projects. What this allows you to do is share all of your testing hosts across multiple teams and multiple projects. So if you think about a lab full of machines that are running an automation tool like Quick Test Professional or Unified Functional Testing, if you're trying to manage that across multiple teams today, it's a manual process because you have to go and plan who has it when. With this, you've got a scheduler built in, and you're able to account for downtime. So if you need to install something like Windows updates, or you're planning on doing some network renovations, whatever it might be, you can tag certain machines as being offline. So you can say that this machine is not going to be available for this amount of time. So you make sure that no one's reserving that hardware for that amount of time. So this is a very intuitive process, and it's very, very powerful. This is actually what's going to power our scheduled test executions. And this goes for both ALM tests that are functional and for performance tests. This works the same way in Performance Center as it does in traditional ALM. The next big thing that we get is the ability for us to verify our builds automatically. So we can build what are called build verification suites. These build verification suites are collections of one or many test sets. And these test sets can be either functional test sets to execute functional automation, or they can be performance test sets. So either or, we can actually have them both in the same build verification suite. Now these build verification suites can be kicked off manually, so you can just click run and then have them go out and run the whole suite. Or you could have these executed automatically by Hudson or Jenkins. So if you have a continuous integration server like Hudson or Jenkins, you can add a build job, and as part of the build job, you can configure it to connect into ALM and execute this build verification suite. There's also some options around having it just run a standard test set, but the build verification suite process is a little bit easier to work with because you can select multiple test sets, you can specify your hardware, and it's going to run automatically for you. The next thing we can do is we can automatically deploy test environments using lab management. So what we do is we connect to another HP tool called Continuous Delivery Automation. So this system actually will allow us to provision new virtual machines for our testing. So what we do is we define an application under test environment. So we might define a different configuration. So maybe we've got a portal application and it needs to have certain servers deployed with it, and a URL that's going to come out of that is what we need to test against. We can configure all of that in our application under a test environment section, configure it with CDA to automatically deploy that environment. So HP CDA is going to support VMware environments, HP Cloud environments, and Amazon EC2 environments. So you can have this go out to the cloud and deploy virtual machines out in the cloud, and you can have it as part of the jobs to, once you deploy it, you can then have it destroy that environment or undeploy it afterwards. So then you're only using the environment for the test that you need, and it'll automatically undeploy. So this is a very, very useful feature if you've got a cloud-based system or an internal cloud, like a private cloud-based system that you want to be able to deploy virtual machines on. So you can set up your build jobs to actually go out, push these builds out onto these new virtual machines, so it's going to deploy the build, execute these tests automatically, undeploy the build. So you can have a fully automated end-to-end process with very little user input. So you can have this happen every night that it goes out, deploys a new build for you. So with that, what we're going to do is go into a demonstration of how this is set up, so I can kind of show you the amount of work that's involved in getting this going and some of the other features in it that we didn't go through in the slide deck. Okay. So I'm logged into an ALM project. Now, when we create an ALM project, let me just go in real quickly. When we go into an ALM project, the first thing we need to do to enable the lab management is in the admin section, so in the admin console. We need to enable the enterprise extension for lab management. So when we have an ALM project, there's a project extensions section, and we need to make sure that the ALM Lab Management extension for functional and performance testing is enabled. So this is the same extension that's going to allow us to use Performance Center with ALM. So all we need to do is just enable the extension, and the extension is going to come automatically with ALM 11.5. And the nice thing is that the extension gets updated automatically with our patch upgrades. So every time we apply a patch, if there's an upgrade to the extension, it's going to be updated automatically. We don't have to worry about going in, making any changes there. The next section we're going to look at is the lab management section. So if I go to the ALM splash screen, there's a link for lab management. Lab management is where we set up all of our testing hosts and where we kind of configure all the different pieces around our lab management system. So the first thing we would do is we need to add our hosts in. So under the lab resources section, we have a host section. In here, we can add all of our testing hosts. Now these testing hosts, if I go in and show you what this looks like, they have a different purpose. So we assign the purpose of this testing host. So as you can see, we've got things like business process testing, quick test, system tests. There's also different purposes that are related to load runner or performance center. So we've got the controller, data processor, load generator. So these are things that are specific to performance center, but we also have host purposes that are specific for functional testing. So again, it's the same capability that we have in performance center that we now get natively in ALM for functional test execution. So we go in and we define the host name, and then we define what kind of purpose the host is going to have. We can also associate different things like different pools that it's going to belong to. We can set up different pools. We can set up different attributes. So if you have a whole lot of hosts, you can go through and pick the ones. You can say, here's a Windows XP, here's a Windows Vista, here's a Windows 7, here's the Windows 7 x64 host. You can divide this up any way you like. We've got our sections to go in, create our host pools. So we can assign different host pools, and we can say that this host is part of this pool. A host can be part of many different pools if you need it to be. And we can also set up different locations. So I can set up locations all over the world if I need to with different sets of machines. And it's going to allow us to just manage those hosts in those locations. So when I go in and add a functional testing host to a machine, the next thing I need to do is enable that machine to connect into ALM. To do that, what we're actually going to do is we're going to use a small service that we have to install called the ALM Lab Service. So the ALM Lab Service is going to be available under the Tools menu. And then there's an ALM Lab Service link. We just install this lab service and configure it. This is what's going to allow the test to run automatically. It's also going to allow it to log into the machine if it's logged out or locked. Once we install this lab service, we just have to go in and configure it. So in this section, we're just giving it the URL for the host name. We give it the username and password to log in and the domain that it would log into. And then we can click Register Host, and it's going to go in and add that host in. Once that host has been registered, it's all connected up. Now, one thing that I'll show you here is that if I was to log out of this machine, so I'll log off. If I go and I do a check host, which is just a verification of our host, it's going to go in and check this host to make sure that it's ready to go. So right here it's saying that there's no execution session available. It's going to try to log in, and we see that it's actually logged in to our remote host for us. This is the capability that's going to allow us to kick off a remote test without having to go in and actually log into that machine. And that's a common problem if you're using the traditional remote execution in Quality Center. So once this is finished, the host is ready to go. And this is just something that you do on the admin side. The next thing I'll show you is that we have our time slots. So we can view our time slots in a grid, or we can view them in a calendar. So I'm going to see all of the time slots that have been created for all of my different projects in this lab management console. I can also go in and I can select a time slot. So let me just say I want to block out a portion on Friday, and I can create a maintenance time slot. So when I do this, I can say that this particular host or this collection of hosts is not going to be available for this period in time, so that nobody can book reservations against that hardware. So I can, in this case, add specific hosts in. So I can pick which hosts are not going to be available, so we can make sure that no one's going to be booking time against them. So from the lab management side, that's about all we have to do to set this up. Now let's go into an ALM project, and I'll show you how the execution works. So I've gone in and created a couple test cases in my test plan. So I've actually got some quick test professional tests or UFT tests. I've actually got some system tests, and I've got a VAPI XP test in here as well, which is a different type of test you can create in ALM. In my test lab, if I go and create a new test set, the first thing we're going to notice that's different is that when I pick my type, I now have different types. So with Performance Center, you're going to create a performance test set. With a functional test set for functional automation, we click functional. Now, I can still use the old-fashioned way of connecting to a remote host if I pick default. So default is the test set type that's going to support manual tests. It's also going to support that traditional execution model. Now, when I create a functional test set, it's not going to let me add in any tests that aren't functional tests that are executed automatically. So it won't let me add in manual tests. It won't let me add in BPT tests that haven't been automated. So it's this specific test type. So I've got a test set that I've already built. And all I do is you build a test set the same way you would any other test set. So once you've got this here, you just select the tests, and you drag and drop them in. And just to give you an example, it actually is going to filter out any tests that are not automated tests. So these folders actually have many manual tests in them. I'm not able to drag and drop those in. It's only going to allow me to add in tests that can be executed automatically. An important thing that we need to do in here is set the execution flow. So in this case, I'm going to go in and I'm going to say I want to log out. So I've got my VAP-EXP test that's going to log out afterwards. And you can set your execution conditions in here traditionally like you could. So if I wanted to make sure that if this test isn't finished, don't go to the next one, you can do that. The same capabilities you've always had with the execution flow still exist. The next thing that we do is we go in and fill in our requested host. So when you add in test cases into a test set, it's going to calculate the types of hosts that you need automatically. And you can go in here and do an auto match, so you can tell it, just go ahead and find any old host that you could find. Or we can add specific hosts in here. So I'm able to edit my host requests. And in this case, I could say I need a test or I need a host, a single host, that fulfills these capabilities. So in this case, I've gone through and said, I want a quick test professional host, I want a system test, I want a VAP-EXP test host. So I can reserve hosts for these particular properties. So once I've got my test set up, I can then go in and run it. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm just going to add a specific host in here. I'm actually going to change this host request to add a specific host, and I want to use this one right here. And I'll just go ahead and just remove this other one. Okay, and it says the requested hosts are available. So I'm going to run my test set. So when I hit run test set, I can then pick if I'm using a reserved time slot or one that I'm just creating on the fly. And I can pick how long I want to run this for. And if I was going to use a provisioned environment through CDA, this is also where I could pick the environment that I want to run. In this case, I'm just going to run one host. I'm just going to run it as a new time slot. I'm going to click Run, and I'm going to get a new Run Execution window that comes up. So this window I can close at any time because it's all being executed server side. So this is a live view into my test execution. So I'm going to go in and just be able to see where I'm at with my execution. And I can close this down. So I can close this window, and at any point I can go back in and open it back up. So again, it's all server-side execution. I don't have to go in and monitor this test. This can be running at any time of night, any time of day. And we see that it's already gone through the first step here. It's going in and reserving the test tool for the next. It's going to go in and reserve Quick Test Professional or Unified Functional Testing. It's going to start executing this test. So on this machine, I'll open up my machine in the background that's actually going to execute the test. And it'll just take a second for it to start executing. So it's all doing in the background. In this case, I've actually got a virtual machine that's running this. So you can have virtual hosts or physical hosts, it doesn't matter. So we see in the background that Unified Functional Testing is running. It's executing my test. So it's going to just be a quick little execution through. It's going to do this Mercury Tours flight booking. Once it's done, it's going to go back in, take a screenshot, and then it's going to log out of the system for me. So this is all happening automatically. I don't have to have the ALM client open at all because this is all server to the remote host execution. And it's going to store our test results back in ALM just like any traditional test result would. So I go in, I'm going to be able to see my run results in here for any of my tests. So I get the same sort of results back in. It's the same exact sort of execution. It's just that it's all running server side. Now the test is finished, it's logged out. If I go in, run my last report, I can go in and see, okay, here's the last execution. We also can see all of our time slots that we've got reserved in this project. Now this is also going to show any time slots that come from other projects. So if we've got time slots that have been reserved against hardware, we're going to be able to see them. Now the amount of detail you can see, again, depends on your permissions in those other projects. So if I've got full access to those other projects, I'm going to see the full time slot information. So for instance, I can open up this time slot, and I'm going to be able to see who reserved it, what it's reserved for, all that information on what kind of host it would be. Now, if I didn't have access to see all of it, I would only see the certain pieces that I've got access to. So again, it follows the permissions that you traditionally see within ALM. I can go in, create a new time slot, and when I create that time slot, I can pick what type of run I want to perform. So whether it's a performance test, or a functional test set, or a build verification suite. So if I say I want to run a functional test set, and I want to run this automatically, I can add the type of host that I want in here. So I can say I want a host that fits the purpose of, say, Quick Test Professional. I can pick my location for my hosts. So I can say I want my default location or whichever locations I might have. And I can pick hosts that have certain attributes. And these attributes are all configurable, so you can go in and pick the type of host that you want to run it against. It'll go in, I can calculate the availability. It'll tell me if there's hardware available for that time, and I can submit my reservation. And actually I need to select a test set real quick so I can associate it back. And I'll say I want to run this test set at 7 a.m. tomorrow, or Thursday, sorry. So now I've got a reserved time slot in my system. So now if I don't do anything, this is actually going to run automatically Friday at 7 a.m. So I've got it set up. It's going to go ahead and run automatically. I didn't have to do anything else. I don't have to go in, hit run, wait for it to run. It's all going to happen automatically for us. The next thing I'm going to show you is how we can configure the system to work with a continuous integration server. So in this case, I've actually got Jenkins running. So Jenkins is one of the more popular ones. So the first thing we have to do in Jenkins is we have to go in and enable the add-in. So inside of Jenkins, I would go to Manage Jenkins, and I just manage the plugins. So in the available plugins, if you just search for HP, we're going to have a plugin that's going to allow us to, I've actually got it in mine installed already, so it's on this side, but you're going to have an HP application automating tools plugin. So this plugin is what's actually going to allow you to execute those remote hosts from Jenkins automatically. You just install it, it takes a few seconds. Then once we go into it, all we need to do is define the ALM server. Once I define the ALM server, I go in and work on my build job. So in this case, I set up a nightly project build, and I'm going to go in and just configure this build job. So I'll go into the build configuration. And in here, what we're going to do is, as part of the build process, I'm going to execute an ALM Lab Management test. So this is actually a build step that you would add. So you can see right here, I can execute tests using HP ALM Lab Management. When I do this, I pick the ALM server I want to configure. I give it its login credentials, the project, the domain that I want to log into, and then what kind of run that I want to use. Do I want to use a build verification suite run, or do I just want to run a test set? Now, again, the build verification suite has support for multiple test sets. So this can be performance and multiple functional test sets. So if I pick test set, it's just a single test set as opposed to a whole lot of tests. We then go in, give it the test set ID, and we just get that ID back from our build verification section. So in my build verification, when I want to set this up, I just go in, create a new build verification suite. It just has a name. That's all we have to do. I have a section for functional test sets, so I can select test sets from my test set tree that I want to include. And then I've got a section for performance test sets, so I can select a test instance from here, select the number of V users that I want to associate. I can then go in and select which host I want to include in this build verification suite. So again, I can do an auto match, or I can say I want to specifically use this host to run this test. So now I can run this manually, so I can click run right here, and it'll go and execute that build verification suite on demand. Very, very similar to when I ran a single test set. This could just run all of my test sets that I have included in my build verification suite. So I go in, grab my ID. In this case, it's 1005. I just put 1005 in my test set ID or build verification suite ID. I give it a name, so what do I want to name this, and then what's my time slot duration? So how long do I want to reserve the time slot for? And this is where you just have to estimate how long your tests typically take to run so that you don't have someone trying to book time on top of a test that might already be running. Once I save that, it's now going to be in the build. So that's all you have to do to configure it to be part of your build process. So if I go back to my build, and I just click Build Now. So I'm going to do a manual build here where it's actually just going to build it. I don't have any code in here, so all it's really going to do is it's going to go into ALM and start executing my test set. So if I go in and I'm just looking at my nightly build verification, I go to my last run report, it's going to show me that it's actually running one right now. So it's going in, it's going to be running some tests. I can go into my time slots, and I'm going to see here's my nightly build verification time slot that I requested. So this happened all automatically, super quick. So I went in, reserved the hardware, and we can see that it's still executing. If I go back here, I see the current status of my execution. So this is something that can happen in the middle of the night, every night when you do a nightly build or a daily build, so you can have all of your test results returned back to you automatically. So this will just take a second to run. Once it runs, it comes back, brings our test results back into ALM like any traditional test run. So just to wrap up, what we went through is we were able to see all the different types of test execution that we could perform. So we were able to go in, execute our tests from ALM. We didn't have to go in and manually wait for it to run. It all happens server side. And that's what the HP ALM Lab Management module is going to provide to you. And again, this is a feature that's only available in the ALM version. So if you have Quality Center, you would have to upgrade to ALM to get this. And it's available in the 11.5 version. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Faraz, and we'll go through some of your questions.
Great job, Patrick. Thanks. So I see a bunch of questions over here that are asking us to more information about the licensing. Does it come with a premium package or a premium ALM software? Can you talk a little bit about that, Patrick, a little bit in terms of defining how Lab Management Modules is licensed for ALM?
Sure. So within, the first thing is there's two different versions of the Quality Center or ALM suite. So we've got Quality Center, just traditionally Quality Center Enterprise, and then there's the ALM version, which is the premier version of the product. So in version 10 of Quality Center, they created two versions. There was the Enterprise, and then there was Premier. In version 11, they renamed Premier as ALM. So if you have Quality Center today, it is a license upgrade to go to the ALM version. The lab management features inside of ALM are actually just consuming a test plan, test lab license component. So most people use full licenses, but if you've got your permission set up where you're actually giving out just partial licenses, it's going to consume a test plan, test lab license. But the key here is that once you're only consuming a license when you go in and you're configuring things. So when I'm setting up a test execution, the test execution itself does not use any ALM licensing. It's all just happening behind the scenes. That being said, you will need licensing for your automated test tool, whether that's Performance Center, whether that's Unified Functional Testing or Service Test. It will consume licensing for those tools, but from an ALM perspective, we only need the ALM license when we're logging in to the lab management and configuring test runs.
Okay, great. Thanks, Patrick. So I have a question here which perhaps might require some elaboration here, but does the lab management work with BuildForge?
So right now, there's not a plug-in for BuildForge. That being said, it should be possible to integrate it. It might take some work. Right now, there's not an HP-provided integration, but there is the Jenkins and Hudson integration. So it's basically just using the REST API that comes with ALM to initiate that remote execution. So with a little bit of know-how, you could go in and actually create your own plugin for BuildForge and make that work.
Okay, great. I have another question here. The question is, does the machine on which the script executes still needs to be unlocked? How does QTP perform click operations?
So the machine does not need to be unlocked. The lab service that we install at the get-go, it's actually going to unlock the machine for us. So at that point, then it's just like any other traditional test execution. So the machine can be in a non-logged in state or a locked state at the beginning of the test execution. Either way, the lab service is going to log into the machine for us, and then it's unlocked, and then it can execute the test just like any traditional test.
Okay, great, thanks. Now I have another question, kind of pertains to licensing somewhat, but the question is the host management and time slot available for all editions or just few editions of ALM?
So it's only the ALM edition. So again, if you had Quality Center, then you would not have this feature. So it's if you have ALM, then you're going to have this. And also, if you would just purchase Performance Center standalone, you would have this as well. Or if you had Performance Center merged with ALM, you would have the same lab management features. The only difference is if you only have Performance Center, then you're not able to execute functional test sets. If you have an ALM system that's merged with Performance Center, then you could execute both functional test sets and performance test sets.
Excellent. So I have a question about TFS. So can you initiate a build verification from TFS?
So right now, the support is for Hudson and Jenkins. That being said, the same question as TeamForge, it actually, or BuildForge, it actually, you wouldn't be very hard to go in and execute it. You would have to do a little bit of manual work just to call the REST APIs, but it is very possible. It's just not an add-in that HP has developed yet, but it would be possible if you can add it as a build action. You could use the REST API to connect into ALM and execute that build verification suite.
Here's another question, Patrick, that kind of goes into what you just said. There's a product named Anthill for build deployment. I'm assuming that the case would be the same here as well, as likely as TFS.
Yep, exactly the same. So again, there's a fully published REST API that you can go in and create additional integrations. Now that being said, it's very possible that HP will go in and create additional integrations. Really, Hudson and Jenkins are the most popular build integration or continuous integration servers, so that's why those got done first. But more than likely, additional continuous integration servers will be implemented, so there'll be a plugin for it in the future. I don't have a specific timeline on those, but in most cases, HP goes from the most popular to the least popular, so those probably will be coming.
Okay, thank you. The other question I have here is server-side testing an option in ALM 11.5 or the new method of testing?
So you can use, in ALM 11.5, you can either use the server-side or you can use the old-fashioned client-side execution. So as long as you've got ALM 11.5, you're able to use this server-side execution where you can execute a test set on a remote machine. And again, it just relies on that lab service being there on that remote machine. And this is actually going to work with Quick Test Professional 11 or Unified Functional Testing 11.5. With Quick Test Professional 11, there is a patch that you have to install to enable that remote execution feature, but it's compatible with either version of that software. But the requirement is that you have to have at least ALM 11.5, so it's 11.5, 11.5.1, or 11.5.2.
Great. The next question here is, would you recommend using Lab Manager to schedule the use of hardware or labs that are only used for manual testing?
So I've had people go in and ask me this before, and you can do that. You have to there's a little bit of a process you'd have to follow to go in and just kind of fake that reservation, but you could definitely do that. So it's something that people haven't really started doing a whole lot yet because this is a new feature, but definitely, if you needed to go in and reserve physical hardware, you could add that hardware in and just make reservations against it. Now, the only thing that you need to watch out for is that it's somewhat of a self-maintaining system. So when we look at our different hosts, so in our host section, we were able to mark one operational or unavailable, and so the system periodically goes through and tries to verify to make sure that those machines are still there so that when you execute a test, it always works. So if you have a host that doesn't actually have the host software on it, it might mark it unavailable, in which case it would probably not allow it to be reserved against. So you'd have to do a little bit of work just to make sure that you actually had all the prerequisites installed to make it work. But in most cases, you could make reservations against it, even if you didn't plan on using the automated execution.
Okay, excellent. I have a couple of questions here on the permissions. So what kind of permissions does ALM need to be able to access the remote machine?
So the only thing we have to do is we install that ALM lab service on the remote machine. So once we install it on that remote machine, we then just sync it back and forth. So basically, it just communicates, and then we've allowed it on the ALM lab server, and then we just provided the login credentials for that remote machine to enable the remote logon or unlock. So those are really the only permissions. Beyond that, it just needs the same permissions that you would use to execute a unified functional testing test or a quick test professional test. So it doesn't need any additional permissions other than the ability to log into the machine. And if you noticed in my test set, actually, one of the concerns is that if you have a physical machine and you log into it, it leaves it open and unlocked. I've actually, even in my example, I've gone in and created a VAP EXP test, which is just another test type you can create in ALM. And in my test script, I actually just did a simple shutdown with the lock screen. So I've got this included in my test sets. So I can go in, unlock the machine, execute my test set, and as the last test, I'll hit log out. So it'll make sure that it logs out and locks the machine so that it's not left wide open. So if it is a physical machine, you don't have any security concerns.
Excellent. So the next question, Patrick, here is that can we enable lab management resources for few projects only and keep it disabled for others?
Yes. So it's done at the project level. So you can go in on a project-by-project basis and enable the Lab Management Enterprise extension. Now, keep in mind that when you enable that extension, it's permanently enabled for that project. So there's no way to go in and disable that enterprise extension. And even if you went in and made a copy of that project, the copy would have to have that enterprise extension enabled. So just something to keep in mind, but you can do it on a project-by-project basis. And additionally, you can specify which projects have access to which hardware. So if you've got a couple different groups that are using the lab management feature and you've got different pools of testing hosts, you can specify that one project can use one set of hosts and then another project can use a different one, and you can set up host limits as well. So you can say that a specific project is only able to consume, let's say, 3 hosts concurrently. So you can kind of keep track on your licensing for unified functional testing or quick test. You can also make sure that one group isn't kind of hogging all of your testing hosts at once.
Excellent. So I have some folks asking a question about whether this presentation is being recorded and will it be made available. So the answer is yes, it's being recorded. It will be on our website, which is www.checkpointtech.com with one T there. It will be made available there. You can see the webinar. It's being recorded. We can send you the presentation if you reach out to us, specifically requesting it. Let's move on to some other questions here. So the question I have, Patrick, is that can I access my results.xml if I execute the test from ALM? What is the path?
So it's like any other test set that is, or test that's executed from ALM. So you can use the Run Results Viewer and connect into ALM and open up the test results. So it's like any traditional test set result that would be stored. As long if the test is stored in ALM and then we're going to save the results in ALM, then it's going to save it in the test runs. We can go in, use the test runs results viewer, and then download the results. So that you can parse through it. It's going to work the same as any other test execution. It saves it all within the test lab of ALM.
Excellent. The other question, the next question I have is, we have ALM 11.52, but it is not connected to Performance Center. I do not see build verification, nor I see time slots section. Do we need to enable them or need to be connected to another tool?
So the Performance Center connection is an extra connection if you purchased Performance Center. But to enable the time slots and the build verifications and really all of the lab management features, what you need to do is log into the site administration, and then if you select the project and then pick the extensions tab, that's where you can go in and pick the enterprise extension you want to enable, and you'll want to enable the lab management extension. And that'll then enable the time slots view. You'll get the build verification suites, and you'll be able to create functional test sets as opposed to just the default test sets in the lab.
Excellent. So I see a lot of, quite a few questions here, whether ALM replaces Performance Center or vice versa. And it seems like it's a little bit ambiguous for a lot of folks out there. So Patrick, can you talk a little bit about, ALM, Performance Center, and the direction that HP is taking the ALM platform, especially integration with Performance Center?
Sure. So traditionally in the old days, Quality Center and Performance Center were really separate tools. So within Performance Center, we had the ability to create our tests, our performance tests. We'd upload our scripts, we'd execute them, we'd have our run results there. And that's a lot of the same functionality that we've had in Quality Center traditionally. So what HP decided to do in the version 11 of the products is, instead of kind of reinventing the wheel and having two different systems that manage test cases, whether those are performance tests or functional tests or manual tests, whatever types of tests they might be, they would just integrate everything into the ALM platform. So what they did is made essentially Performance Center just an extension of the ALM capabilities. So we've got ALM by default is going to be able to run manual test cases. With this lab management feature, we're able to execute automated test cases using Unified Functional Testing or Quick Test Professional. Performance Center is a little bit different because it's got some additional hardware requirements and capabilities that it needs to do. So if we basically just enable the same lab management module, and then we connect the Performance Center server to it, so an additional server component that provides additional screens and functionality, and then the additional machines that we need for performance testing, so things like load generators and controllers. So really what HP has done is they view the ALM platform as the central location for all of the testing assets. So with an integrated ALM Performance Center system, you can create performance requirements, functional requirements, you can create performance tests, functional tests, and you can have functional and performance defects all under one system, all under one project. So really it's an end-to-end view of all your testing activities, and that's the direction that HP is going, and it's really just one combined system. So that's kind of the difference between them. Now you can go out, and if you purchase Performance Center, you could deploy Performance Center standalone, which still requires the ALM server. So it's the same sort of capabilities. You still need the ALM server, you can still schedule your tests, but you're not able to manage functional testing with it. So there's no manual tests and there's no automated functional tests. If you combine the two, so if you combine ALM licensing and Performance Center licensing, then you've got the ability to do functional tests and performance tests all from the same project.
Excellent. So I have a question here, kind of going back to your previous, one of your previous answers, Patrick. You talked about the lab service tool, right? The agent that you install, the service you install on the VM. Can you clarify whether that needs to be on the virtual machine itself, whether you install that on the ALM server? Where does that service really go?
So that's going to be installed on the remote testing host, whether that's the virtual machine or physical machine. We don't have to install anything extra on the ALM server. So if you think about having a test lab that has many different machines running Quick Test Professional or Unified Functional Testing, it's a small service that gets installed on those machines.
Okay. The next question I have is related to permissions. The question is, can you tell me what ALM site permissions are needed to use lab management?
So under lab management, what we'll have to do, there's a couple different permission levels. We first have to have a lab management user, so someone who can go in and configure the hosts, configure the time slots, configure the projects. And then the additional permissions are done by module within the lab management. So whether it's build verification suites or time slots, the default permissions that ALM will give you when you create a project are going to allow you to do just about everything. But like any other ALM project, it's fully configurable. So every single piece of functionality within the lab management is able to be configured for permissions. So you can go in and say that a certain group is not able to create build verification suites or execute them, or one group can create time slots, etc. So the permissions inside of the projects are very, very granular, but we just need to assign someone or a group of people that are able to go in and configure our lab setup, so adding our hosts in, making them unavailable for patching, things like that.
Excellent. I have a question here about, it's a very good question, does lab management add-in or the module, when you utilize it, does it affect the performance of the project?
No, it does not. So you should not notice any performance differences because it's just running on the server, and it's running whether you're using the project or not. So all those capabilities are kind of baked right into the project. So if you have lab management turned on, you should not notice any performance degradation.
Okay. Let's move on to the next question. Perhaps might need some clarification here, but I'll repeat the question anyway. Can I integrate two different ALM instances, defect data, in one instance? For example, I have ALM 11 and ALM 11.52. So can I use a unique defect tracking for both of the versions in one ALM?
So in some cases you can, as long as you're using the ALM version. There's the ALM synchronizer that will allow you to synchronize defects. Now, what might get you into a bit of a bind is having different versions. Different major versions will not work. So if I have version 11 and I try to synchronize it with 11.5, that will not work. I would have to get back to you on whether or not the 11.5 versus 11.5.2 synchronization would work. I think it would, but I'd have to verify that.
Okay. Folks, we are here about 1 o'clock, so I'm going to ask two more questions, and we're going to close the session here. But once again, you can go and review and look at this recording on our website. It should be, we'll make it available as soon as possible, I'm assuming within the next day or two. Also, I've seen some questions here asking if they can share this webinar with other folks. Yes, absolutely. That's why we're putting it on the website. So please feel free to forward it to anyone in your team or within your organization. Okay, so my second last question, can lab management be upgraded independently of ALM? For example, we're going to upgrade ALM to 11.52, but we may need to upgrade lab management before this.
So because it's a core part of ALM, you can't upgrade it individually. So the enterprise extension that runs lab management is part of the ALM core platform. So unfortunately, everything upgrades together. So if you're on version 11.5 and you upgrade to 11.5.2, every piece of your ALM platform gets upgraded, including the lab management. So you can't upgrade them individually.
Okay. My last question, which is, we have ALM Performance Center 11.52. Can we have Performance Center and QC under one ALM server or instance?
Could you repeat the last part of that real quick?
Okay, so it looks like the customer has ALM Performance Center 11.52. What the question is, can we have Performance Center and Quality Center under one ALM server?
Yes, as long as the Quality Center is actually ALM. So to combine ALM and Performance Center licensing, you need to have the ALM licensing. So if you have Quality Center Enterprise and you have Performance Center, unfortunately you'd have to have two different ALM servers, one ALM server providing the Quality Center licensing, one ALM server providing the Performance Center licensing. If you have the ALM licensing, you're then able to combine them into one server, and it's kind of a dual use where then you get the capabilities of running performance tests and functional test sets.
Okay. I said that was the last question, but I see a very good question related to lab management. I figured I'll ask, and then we'll close this session. For folks that we were not able to answer the questions, please feel free to reach out to us. We'll be happy to work with you one-on-one. Patrick will be available. Feel free to send him an email, and he'll be happy to answer any questions. So this is the last question, Patrick. Is there an API provided for lab management? And then, for example, it says, can I execute functional tests to host using a Visual Basic script?
Yes, so the REST-based API is available for ALM, and the lab management is part of that. So you should be able to create a script that would initiate a remote execution of a test using the REST-based API. So that is available. There's also the COM-based API that has traditionally been available. You should also be able to use that for a piece of it, although most of the new functionality has been put into the REST API. So between the two APIs, you should be able to create a script using, say, Visual Basic or VB.NET that can execute a test for you.
Okay, excellent. Well, folks, thanks for your time. We really appreciate it. Again, I apologize if we're not able to answer your questions in the allotted time that we had, but we appreciate you joining the webinar and look forward to having you on additional webinars. Feel free to reach out to us if you have additional questions or if we can help you with any of the things. For example, if you want to upgrade to lab management or if you have specific issues that you want to address, we'll be happy to work with you. Once again, thank you and have a wonderful day.